The next panel of the morning before lunch will be on policies for building retention. And I want to stress that we want to talk about policies and solutions that are scalable and looking at this from a 50,000 foot level versus drilling down to some of the brass tacks for individuals. This panel will be moderated by Lisa Kahn, National Organizing Director of FWD.US. Lisa, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim. Hey, everybody. My name is Lisa Kahn, as I was just so kindly introduced, and I work for a political advocacy organization called Forward US. We were founded about 2 years ago with the goal of keeping the American dream competitive and achievable in the 21st century. And so I'm really excited to bring more of a policy perspective to this incredible conversation and to be up here with all of you. So we're here to tackle some questions about why such a small fraction of venture capitalists are women, why generally women tend to be underrepresented in founding and executive teams of startups, and most importantly, effective strategies for fostering female leadership in the business world. So my background is in politics and I work in the political sphere. And one of the things that struck me with the previous panel is what Brooke said about this not just being about women in tech, and she talked about it not just being about white middle-class women. But I think what's important to remember is that we're not just talking about tech. Tech does not exist alone. It does not exist in some secret island somewhere, although Silicon Valley feels like that sometimes. But really, technology, the industry, is connected to all sorts of other things. In particular, it's connected to public policy and connected to those that make public policy decisions. So I think that there are very similar problems in the business world and in the world of politics, and that's not something that I've heard talked about yet today. And women attaining leadership positions in Congress, women running for office, the number of women at top leadership in House and Senate is really dismal for, I think, a lot of the similar reasons that we've talked about so far affecting the tech industry. In the political world, the percent of female legislators in the United States falls so far behind other countries. It's 60 out of 136. That's crazy, and I think really scary. What are the stakes of this? If we don't change anything, if we don't actively start to identify and then I think facilitate some of the very clear adjustments that we're going to start talking about today, it'll take us about 71 years to achieve what many nations have in terms of equality and representation in our government. 71 years, it is 3 generations from now. Think about what life will be like in 71 years. We will definitely have self-driving cars. 3D printers will be able to print a heart for you or an organ for you. 71 years is just really, I don't think, acceptable for any of us. So what's causing this problem? We'll talk a bit about that, but we're really going to focus on solutions. And I think to very sort of simply define the problem, we can look at supply side, the pipeline problem, the fact that there aren't necessarily women who have the connections, the skills, the social capital to be able to be successful in the fields that we're talking about. And then the demand side, some of these gender biases and perceptions, definitions of what the ideal worker actually is. So what are some solutions? We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about supply side solutions, demand side solutions, and things that fall somewhere in between. And I want to start by talking about some public policy solutions. There are all sorts of, I think, various approaches that we can take, and one that I want to focus on in my opening remarks before hearing from some of the other women on this panel is immigration reform. So how many of you in the room happen to be immigrants, out of curiosity? Very, very large percent. That's in line with a lot of the numbers. So immigrants are actually, over the last 50 years or so, more immigrants are women than men. It's about 60% women, which was not true 50 years ago. And immigrant women are actually more likely to start businesses than non-immigrant women. 40% of all immigrant business owners are women versus 20% of all businesses generally. Very interesting. And obviously when you own a business, when you start a business, you're able to hire all sorts of people, mentor people, be a really great example. And our immigration policy really doesn't keep up with that kind of trend and with that kind of reality. H-1B holders, which are visas for high-skilled immigrants, only 30% of H-1B holders are women. H-4 visas, which is the visa that a spouse gets of someone on an H-1B, about 90% of those are women. And the problem with H-4 visas is women don't actually have authorization to work. They're legally not able to work in this country. And so if we're talking about retention and if we're talking about fostering female leadership, immigration reform, I think, is a very obvious and critical policy that we can work towards. So to close before handing over to the rest of you, I want to just talk about gender inequality in the halls of Congress also breeds inequality in the boardroom, or I think in a more positive way, if we have gender parity in Congress and other statewide elected official offices, we will be able to have more policies that are relevant for women. And conversely, women with the resources, valuable skills, and connections to be able to help elect other people will allow us to have more representation in the halls of Congress. So that's just some opening framing, and I'm excited to get going with the conversation. So to introduce the incredible women to my left, to start, we have Denise Gamble, right? All right, Senior Director of Diversity and Inclusion with Exponential Talent. We have Tiffany Crawford, who's the founder of Great Leadership Institute. And we have Michelle Ainger, which rhymes with danger, who is the Women's Initiative Network Director and works with eBay. And Shelley Zallis, who's the Chief Innovation Officer with Ipsos. So why don't you go ahead and get started?
Great, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
I'm going to provide a frame that's a bit more focused on the demand side and on what we can do to change things in companies. I want to first say, though, that we've heard a little bit or a lot about some of the problems, and it's pretty depressing. But I also want to say that I just really feel some real cause for optimism. I think the fact that we're all in this room today talking about this, that there is a new momentum in the industry, in the world. People are talking about this. Companies are building teams, sharing numbers, and focusing on this in a way that we haven't seen. And we, I think all in this room have a responsibility to run with that and make sure that we do not lose that momentum and we just keep moving it forward. I think the other thing that really gives me cause for optimism is that we know more about these problems than we ever have before. There is a huge and increasing body of research from great academics, you've heard from some of them today, that help us understand this. There are companies and organizations that are publishing reports and companies sharing best practices that are evidence-based and really working. And so I hope we can talk about that a little bit. And I think really focus on systemic change because while I really want to help diverse people navigate the uncomfortable worlds that they are in, we've got to stop fixing the women and start fixing the companies if we want to see change. So I think just in terms of understanding some of the challenges, we've heard a bit about some of the research on stereotype and unconscious bias. I would point out particularly for women in STEM, there are some really good studies that have helped us understand why women are leading. So Fuad and Singh from Milwaukee, the work of Sylvia Ann Hewlett at the Center for Talent Innovation, and a shout out to the AAUW, which just came out with another new report building on their great one from a couple years ago. Unfortunately, these are really complex problems, and it takes a lot of commitment and focus. And so I want to share a frame I believe is important, that there are really kind of three areas of work that companies need to focus in. And the first one would be people, policies, and processes. The second would be programs to develop and advance women in tech. And the third would be culture change to foster inclusion. And before I talk a little bit about each of those, I also want to say that it's really critical that supporting and driving these initiatives in those areas is that you need a foundation of analytics. We need to know that we're solving for the right problems, and the problems vary tremendously from company to company. And so what's working, the great new practice you read about in the Fortune article or in the New York Times isn't necessarily going to be what moves the needle in your company. And so it's really important to dive into the analytics and understand the root causes of the challenges that you face, and then to build measurement and accountability to drive change that addresses those. So the first thing, when I talk about people, policies, and processes, these are the systems, the infrastructures in our company that's affecting everybody's day-to-day experience of the workplace. And so I think one of the areas that has been talked about a lot is flexibility and policies that enable people to balance their lives or integrate their lives. I liked the phrase earlier today about work-life distinction, and as a new way of thinking about it. And so you've seen companies like Google step forward and offer not just paid, lengthier maternity leave, but also parental leave, not just for dads, for adoption, for all sorts of family leave circumstances to help people. And I think we heard in the last panel about some of the decision processes that are made in companies, and hiring is a huge one. And I think a lot of the practices that were covered there were really, really helpful. I think we need to look at the job talks that your colleagues in TA are giving when they go out to schools. There's some great research being done at Stanford about when recruiters thinking that they're looking for the cream of the crop, and we just can't find the women, and they're not noticing that when they give the job talk about the ping pong and the beer fridges and the 24/7 culture, that women are getting up and self-selecting out and walking away from those companies, and that the companies are turning people off. But there's blind screening. There are new technology companies that are trying to help companies do blind resume reviews or blind testing, and so I think there's a lot of promising work there. For retention and advancement, it's really, I think, about performance review process, and not just performance review, but all the way we're evaluating people in the workplace, whether it's who gets that stretch assignment, that high visibility assignment, that promotion. There are some companies blowing up their performance review processes right now because they're not working for all of their employees. I'm not sure if that's the solution either, but companies are really beginning to look at this, and how the language of how male and female reviewers write about women versus writing about men is I think, a really important area to focus on. The second area is companies are building a variety of great practices that are working around programs and initiatives that help women build their skill sets and career competencies and advance in the workplace. And so I think most companies, some of the low-hanging fruit that doesn't take a lot of resources, have employee resource groups and provide opportunities for women to extend their networks and connect with others at work and elsewhere. There's been a lot of work, and particularly Sylvia and Hewlett, on sponsorship. Women actually need both mentorship and sponsorship often doesn't just happen for women, and so companies need to think about and can think about effective ways to foster sponsorship, if not through formal matching. Technical skill development. I mean, there's a lot of the soft skill career development, but for women who are in tech companies, and particularly women who want to advance and be a fellow or a distinguished or principal engineer in the individual contributor track, that credibility of displaying your technical chops and really being known for what you can do is really important. And so helping people learn to patent and publish and present and giving those opportunities is really critical. IBM, there was a woman at IBM who was applying for a patent, was horrified not to meet any other women during the process. And she went back and started an employee resource group, grassroots, over 1,000 women worldwide within a year, and 3 years later, they have filed 800 patents. They have connected with other colleagues that they would never have known in other countries, and been really, really successful. It did not take a dime or anything from IBM, and yet this woman just took it on herself and has made a huge change at a company that prides patenting as a key accomplishment to advance. In that same way, and I think we're going to hear a little bit more about it, is leadership development programs. And there's some new work out by Herminia Ibarra and Robin Ely. There are some great ways that companies are involving women in leadership development. I want to call out an example. IBM has a technical women's pipeline program where they bring together a cohort of women from around the world, 2 from the US and everybody else. And I think there's 16-person cohorts. And each one is paired with both a distinguished engineer, a technical coach, and a business line VP advocate. And so they're getting the mentoring and sponsorship through this 2-day session that these 16 women and their 32 coaches are spending together, and there's now a network of 300 people who have gone through this program. The coaches, the executives are learning from it, and all of these high potential women that are getting this amazing opportunity are learning from it as well. That's great, and those kinds of programs can be really important. I've also seen companies be really successful oversampling women into their existing co-ed leadership development programs to make sure that they're really, that they're not only because of self-nomination when women don't self-nominate, and that they're making sure that women get these opportunities. And so all the rising male and female stars get to know each other, and it's a really important connection as they work in their companies. The third piece I wanted to talk about was initiatives to build more inclusive and collaborative cultures that leverage all the talent that a company has. And I think this is among the most difficult work. It's about behaviors. It's about how each of us enact culture every single day in our interactions. Alexander Kalov and Frank Dobbin have done some work on how tricky some of the interventions can be, like unconscious bias training. It can't be mandatory. It has to be from people who are curious and open to learning about how they can build a more inclusive workforce. Melissa Thomas Hunt has done some really strong research on fostering inclusive team interactions, and I think we'll also hear a little bit about micro-inequities and some of the ways that we can, in our daily work, do small acts of inclusion. And I've probably gone on too long, but let me just say that, you know, no company can boil the ocean, and so focus is really important, figuring out what matters at your company and what fits your company's culture and how you're going to evolve and improve that culture. And then involving the leaders, the line managers, sharing data with them so they can know what the situation is and whether they're moving the needle in a positive direction. And people need to be having conversations with them as part of their performance, like any other business objective. And all the, I think, role model companies like IBM and eBay and Intel and Google, they are all doing it partly because they have accountability mechanisms in place.
Thank you. Tiffany.
So I'm going to walk through the conversation from an issue opportunity or issue challenge opportunity. But before I get into that, I want to share a little bit about myself and just setting the context. So I'm actually one of the people that left the pipeline. I started out in undergrad in electrical engineering at Howard University. And I actually, in undergrad, absolutely loved school. I loved coding. I loved developing. I had some really powerful mentors. When I finished Howard, I felt like I could take on the world. I had powerful internships, IBM. I love IBM. Worked there for a summer. And then I went to Berkeley, and I was in a PhD program. And the work that I wanted to do, which is related to the work that I do now, is I wanted to study mind-body connection, but I was looking at it from a bioimaging perspective. And so I chose digital signal processing because, you know, the body being an electrochemical signaling system, I figured it was like my segue. And it was tough. I was all over campus. I ended up in electrical engineering. You had to have an advisor in the electrical engineering department, and no one in EE at the time at Berkeley was in EECS, so electrical engineering and computer science, was doing bio research. There was some biomem stuff going on, but not related to this. So my advisor ended up being the chair of bioengineering, but he had an appointment in EE. And long story short, I ended up leaving with a master's because I decided that I wanted to work with the people because I wasn't getting what I really needed. Oddly enough, the year I left, Berkeley added a bio concentration within the department. So change has been made. So from that perspective, I see the issues in terms of two conversations. And the reason why it's not an easy conversation or even topic to broach is it's structural, and then there's also the bias and subconscious that people are speaking about. So from a structural perspective, we have systems, processes, programs, people in place that have been doing things for a certain way for a long amount of time, one. Also, they don't know what they don't know, right? I remember when I was studying for the SATs and I took a course on it, and the person that our teacher shared with us, like, this how you do on this test doesn't define who you are. And this test was designed by white males. So when you're designing a test as a white male, you can't but help design it for a white male. It's intrinsic, so it's built into the structure. And so that's what we have in place from a structural perspective. And then on a subconscious perspective, just from our own personal bias, our beliefs, from the media, and then what we have been taught based off the structure, what creates success inside of these companies, we have the way we think we need to be, do, and behave to create success. So those are the issues at hand, right, that we're looking to address. The challenge is, the great part about it is it's present, we're willing to talk about it, people are looking at it, and we know something needs to be changed. And not only that, which is, I think, just relevant to where we are as a society and domestically and globally, our systems are breaking, right? Like we're running out of talent. The financial systems are breaking. Like things are not working anymore. The justice system is breaking. So huge events are happening that are making us look at what's going on. And so that's part of the opportunity. The challenge is we have a lot of fear, right? When it's time to change, I think Valerie talked about it earlier, like you have people in place that who they are and their identity and the structure that they've built feels threatened. So not only do you have fear in place where change is hard, but then you also have the people that are in power can potentially feel the most threatened. And I was thinking about it earlier, and I haven't done any research on this in terms of like why it's getting worse. And a lot of things are getting worse in our society right now, and I kind of see it as things start to change and fear increases. It's like you kind of hold on tighter, right? You're holding on to the structure tighter. From a beginning to look at solutions, right? There's lots of policies out there. There's lots of programs. What I would say, and I love that UCLA was willing to have a conversation around what is missing, right? Because we've been talking about it for decades. Lots of research is being done. And so I just want to add to the conversation in terms of how we're creating those policies. Instead of what are the policies, but how we're creating those policies from the perspective of what's different. And I just want to give an example that is, so in my company, I like to be at the kind of like at the intersection of technology, entrepreneurship, and leadership. And so recently I interviewed a company, incubator style nonprofit called 4.0 Schools. And the founder had been in education, so it's a different sector, but of course we can always learn from other sectors on what they're doing. And he's been in education for 20 years, and he spent some time in the tech world, in a co-working space. And he saw that the way the people work together and innovative and prototyping he's like, this is true innovation. What we see now for charter schools is what we call reforming the education school is really just doing the same thing in a new way, right? And so what he's done is been able to create this incubator-style system that innovates and prototypes schools and solutions for teachers, whether it be products or programs, for the education world. And so I think that's an opportunity in terms of policy creation for this conversation in terms of retention in tech. So to be more specific, I love what Denise said about about getting clear on what your issues are. Within a company, I think a great way to start in terms of the retention conversation is the day-to-day experience, right? So we definitely have issues of pay raise, issues of maternity leave, issues of promotions, and then the way it impacts us. And I can see from my personal experience and from friends, I have a lot of women friends that are in tech. It's like on a daily basis, being cut off in meetings, like the microaggressions, being passed over for promotions. That's how it shows up. It's like we have these big systemic issues, but then it's like what's at the core of it and how is it coming into place. And so from that perspective, I think there's an opportunity to really identify, and each company is different, but within your company, to look at how the conversation is impacting the woman. So really first, speaking to the woman that you have in your company, identifying what those key issues are for them. Is it a promotion? Is it maternity leave? Is it feeling like they can't get a word in edgewise? Is it feeling like they're not being, their ideas aren't valued? Really and then creating working groups. Creating working groups that can really begin to prototype solutions and policies that can address that. And so the key about the beauty of a working group is you have a collaborative effort. obviously you definitely need the executive leadership involved to create success. The beauty there also is that the women that are in leadership, and then the men that are in leadership that care about the issue, and then the women that are in middle to upper level management that have close allies and mentors and sponsors that they can get involved in the conversation. And then having that collaborative effort in terms of, like, from a top-down approach, what is going on, and being able to leverage analytics around that and coming up with solutions like this isn't working, that isn't working, because we don't quite know what the answer is yet, but we definitely know that it needs to be it needs to happen, and the people that are in the position to really make a difference have to be involved in the conversation and not feeling like they're being ousted or they're the problem. And so I think that's a big piece there. And then to just like bring it like full circle to like I don't know, kind of bring it together as an umbrella. It's really about who I think the prototyping and the conversation really gives us an opportunity to look at who are we being as individuals inside of the conversation, right? Because the if the same people with the same ideas and the same thoughts are making the new policies, is it really going to make a difference, and how is it going to change? So who are we willing to be? How are we willing to change the way we approach the world, the way we do things, to have it be different? And so, yeah, I'll stop there for now.
Well, I'm Michelle Manger. I'm from eBay, and I'm delighted to be here. I thought I might just start with, on a personal note, which is to say that this is just a lovely venue to be here. It has me thinking about, kind of my past, and I've had a very eclectic career. I actually, at one point early in my career, started out working for a judge, or two judges, actually, in the court system, and actually I made the conscious decision not to go to law school, partly because I didn't think that adversarial method of engaging in change was the path for me. And what I ended up later on doing is I joined a consulting firm later on in my career after working some technology and actually financial services, and learned about this thing called change management. And so I actually see myself as a diversity change agent, and have had the good fortune of working in at least two companies that take diversity as a business problem. And I think this is what we have right now in our industry, is that we have an industry problem, and I think that Denise had alluded that this is a systemic challenge, and I think that lends itself to this notion of everyone's kind of looking for what's the one right thing that we need to do to like get the quick fix. And this is not a quick fix situation. I think there's opportunities to get quick wins, but this is a multi-year journey. And I just want to say that I think that emotions can sustain us, in the short run, but we need to have our eyes on that this is a long-term process, and it requires discipline and it requires commitment. And so from the eBay story that I can tell, we've been on our gender diversity journey for about 4.5 years. I joined the company about 3.5 years ago, and became the leader of our Women's Initiative Network about 2 years ago. And so I came into it as the company was kind of on this journey. And I will say this, that I think there are 3 things, all of which are pretty unsexy things to talk about, but there are 3 things that really are at the heart of the progress that we've made as a company. And I co-wrote an article with my boss, Beth Axelrod, who heads global HR of eBay Inc., in the McKinsey Quarterly 50th Anniversary Edition last fall, called Realizing the Power of Talented Women. So I'm going to speak a little bit from that, but encourage you all to check that out, because that has probably more details in it. So there are 3 things that I think have been really important in our story, and they dovetail a little bit with what Denise had said, and there are things that Madeline Heilman, who spoke earlier, come into play. And those 3 things are executive leadership commitment, a focus on people processes, and then tracking our progress and effectiveness in a transparent way. Transparency has really been our accountability measure. So I'll start off with what I think is our CEO commitment. So I came into the role. The Women's Initiative Network can be seen in 2 different ways. One, it is primarily our CEO founded and sponsored gender diversity initiative. And then secondarily, it also is a platform for our affinity group for women in the company, particularly women in leadership roles, which we define as directors and above. And so it's an important distinction because I think that affinity groups, employee resource groups are important as a part of the culture. They can help identify, kind of what, have their finger on the pulse of what is the day-to-day experience of women in the company. But that notion that we have a CEO founded and sponsored gender diversity initiative is really what focuses our leaders' attention on this. And so John Donahoe, who's been the CEO of eBay Inc. for quite some time, this is actually the second company that he's founded a gender diversity initiative. When he was the head of Bain and Company, he also founded a gender diversity initiative there too. So he's got a lot of learnings coming into this, and he knew that this was going to be a multi-year journey. He also has taken I would describe as more of a change management approach versus a kind of a stick approach. And this is where I can share the eBay story. I wouldn't, begin to say that, your company should do one way or the other. It kind of depends on what your culture is. But our culture is one where, generally speaking, given a good reason, our leaders will embrace that kind of change. We're a technology company. We kind of expect change. And so what John did is he started this initiative. He kicked it off with a visible event, what we call it our Global Win Summit, and then engaged the women in the organization to say, look, I'm committed to this. He shared his personal story about why this was so important. And then said, I need your help in identifying what we need to go do. So there was a task force that was formed, and one of the results of that task force was my job was created, so that there was a dedicated group that was focused on this, on gender diversity, and working with our leaders to really build in accountability. So one of the things that we did from the beginning was also we shared our gender demographic data. And so there's been discussion about companies who have and haven't done this publicly, but we started about 4.5 years ago disclosing that internally within the company. And it established a baseline. And what Beth did at the time was she disclosed it to all the women leaders in the company. So the first WIN Summit that we had was about 200 women leaders. We invited all the women globally who were in director and above positions, and our senior executives. And so that transparency of sharing that data with 200 people in the room meant that, probably the people that were most vested in change knew what those numbers were, as well as the senior executives. And since then, what we've done with the transparency, I know I'm kind of bouncing around my 3 topics, but they're kind of interrelated. Since then, what we've done with the data is we pull that data every year, and we pull it not only in the eBay Inc. level, we pull it for APAC, we pull it for EMEA, we pull it for our customer service and operations. We have a fairly large customer service operation. We pull it for our technology groups. We pull it for each of our business units. Some of you may know that eBay Inc. is not only our eBay consumer-facing brand, but also PayPal. We're in the middle of separating those 2 companies, so it's a very exciting time for our company right now. And we also have a couple other smaller businesses like StubHub and a business called eBay Enterprise, which you probably will never have heard of, but if you've ever bought anything on Toys R Us or Dick's Sporting Goods, your experience has been touched by our eBay Enterprise group. So we pull this data across all of those businesses. We look at both the number and also the representation of women in those groups. And generally, we focus on women in leadership roles because that's really where our biggest gap is. We actually have, I think, about 46% of our workforce is women, so we're almost at parity. But where our gap is really, heading towards the top. So we pay particular attention at our pipeline leading into director, and then director, senior director, VP plus. And so what we then do is we take that data that we've sliced and diced, and we bring it to the senior vice president staff meeting. So that's generally a senior vice president in my company is about the top 30 leaders of the company. Our workforce is about 34,000 employees globally. So that SVP will have generally VPs on their staff, and we take them through the data and say, look, this is how eBay Inc. is overall. This is how the women in your organization are represented, and this is how they're distributed. And then what we do is we actually just rank order by bar charts how the women fall out in each of those VPs. And we just allow them to have the conversation. So we don't force goals. We just have the conversation. And they actually, they're smart people. They have the conversation around, what they've done and what has been challenging. But it does kind of spur this sense of innate competition. Like, no one really wants to be the smallest bar at the bottom of the chart, even if this isn't like their particular issue. We have leaders that are all at all ranges of the change curve. So even for those leaders who aren't passionate advocates for this, they still don't want to be the person at the bottom of the chart. So we try to engage them in that way. One of the things that we've had the good fortune of having in our gender diversity journey is that we've actually seen progress in growing both the number and proportion of women in leadership roles for every year that we've engaged in this. So there are some companies that make great progress and then they kind of slide back again. In our 4.5 years, we've made progress every year. So we've made them across the board. So we've made it in technology, we've made in technology roles, we've made it in APAC and EMEA as well as in the US. And so it's a great story to get out there to tell. And so we've shared that data in both with leaders, but also in various event forums internally where our women have chosen to get together with their leaders to focus on gender diversity. And one of the things that was happening as we were sharing this data is that there's a great story to be told in the data. There's progress in terms of promotions, progress in terms of hiring. We're hiring generally above the representation of women in those leadership roles. There's a great story in terms of reduced attrition as well. The problem with that, to Tiffany's point when she talked about micro inequities in the day-to-day experience of our women, is that we would get out there, we would share this data, and our women would come up and say, thank you for sharing the data. I'm so proud to be in a company where we have a gender diversity initiative, where it's sponsored and founded by the CEO, but I gotta tell you, it's not so easy to be a woman in this company. And the stories would come out. And one woman's story might be that we have this policy around part-time, when they came back from maternity leave, they weren't actually able to create a part-time role, and their manager felt like they were supportive, but on the other hand, felt like they couldn't carve out a part-time role because he was accountable to FTE. So he would create a part-time role, but not get the approval to backfill the other 50%. So it was a policy that women didn't feel like they could avail themselves to. And in another instance, it would be, a woman that thought they were going up for promotion, but then didn't get the promotion and doesn't really understand why. And so as these stories were coming out, our CEO coined the phrase, I think that our demographics may be ahead of our reality. And so Beth and I, so it's a great problem to have, right? I mean, we're actually making demographic progress, but there's still challenges to be had. So Beth and I thought about this, and we thought about how, as a technology company, data really matters. And in most companies, I think data really matters. What matters gets measured. And so we thought, how can we take these anecdotal stories, these everyday experiences, and actually measure this, right? And be able to target what we need to go do. And so we decided, and by the way, we do an engagement survey, an annual engagement survey, which most big companies do. And we looked at it and looked for gender differences, and there really weren't any great gender differences. The one thing I'll just mention on the topic of engagement surveys is that in terms of what drives engagement, for our women, a sense of purpose and connection to the company's purpose was a much bigger factor than it was for men in the company in terms of driving engagement. And I think that's kind of a common theme. So purpose is a really important thing to identify, and it's an area to start at in your company if you're just getting started. At any rate, so we looked at our engagement survey and hadn't found any differences between men and women, like across the board. There are differences here and there, but nothing that we could point our fingers to. So we really felt like we needed another measure to get after this, get after our culture. And so what we did is we decided to do a gender diversity survey, and we explicitly called it that because that was our purpose. And initially we sent it to all the leaders of our company just as a kind of a starting point to get a sense for, do men and women have different experiences in the company, and can we actually measure this? So it turns out, we did the survey about 2.5 years ago. It turns out that women in the company were having a different experience, particularly at leadership levels. So we asked about 50-some questions, and of those questions, 2/3 of them had a statistically notable difference where the women were less favorable than the men. There were no instances of questions where men were more favorable than the women. And what was very striking was that the questions around our people processes, which are generally hiring, performance assessment, it carries over a little bit in how job opportunity happens. We only asked one question around compensation because it's a very, this area is complicated, but comp in particular is even more complicated. Those were the areas where our women felt were the least favorable. And what we also noticed was that our men actually weren't all that favorable either. So here was an area where through our gender diversity initiative, we identified something that we could go fix, not only for our women in the organization, but for our men too. And so I had the privilege of being in the meeting, the SVP meeting. I mentioned that's the top 30 leaders of the company, when this data was being presented to them. Way above my pay grade, but here I was. And the reaction is shocking. As you can imagine, the senior leaders of my company don't really have a problem with talking. You know, they have lots to say on pretty much any topic. But I will say on this, they were very, very quiet. I think they personally were moved by how striking the data was. The data was very clear. You couldn't argue about methodology, although certainly there were methodology things that we had identified. But you couldn't argue about, well, we used a 7 point scale versus a 5-point scale, and that's why some of the. I mean, it was clear that the women were having a different experience, and so that really provided a baseline to then go prioritize these people processes as an issue. And what we chose to do, because gender diversity is important, and I have this role, but really the importance of driving this forward is with the thousands of people managers in the company. So we make we work with senior leaders of the company, but the reality is the performance management, the performance assessments that are happening, the decisions that are being made after based on the assessments that are being done in the company are made by thousands of people managers in the company. So we chose to take these learnings and embed them in existing HR processes around people manager effectiveness, looking at our performance management process, and embed them in those efforts. And so I did a lot of work with our HR business partners that work with our senior leaders, as well as other folks in HR and as well as in recruiting, to help embed these learnings in those organizations so that we can go target the right things. One final thing I'll say about about people processes is that in our journey, we noticed beginning in 2014 that recruiting, so I mentioned that the proportion of women in leadership was growing. And so what happens is when you're growing your proportion of women in leadership, it gets harder to sustain that progress. And so we started out, I think, around 23 or 24% women in leadership when we first started this. We just released our latest diversity statistics yesterday, and it was covered by USA Today, so you can find that or on our website. And we're now at 29% of women in leadership roles, which is really industry leading for the technology industry, and pretty impressive considering we have about 34,000 employees. I think you can look at companies like Pinterest and Etsy, and while they're doing amazing things, and I don't mean to take anything away from what they're doing, it's just the scale is much smaller, and so it's hard to compare, a 1 percentage point increase at companies like Google and eBay and Microsoft to companies that are much smaller. At any rate, what we had noticed in terms of recruiting was that it was like not becoming a lever of progress for us anymore. And so we were kind of watching it and keeping an eye on that beginning in 2014, noticing that was just in line with the proportion of women in our leadership population. And then when we took into account acqui-hires, which are really common in the technology industry to acquire talent, particularly you're looking at your CTO and founder roles, they tend to be male, which is probably no surprise to this audience and relevant to the discussion that's going on next door. And when we took into account that, it was actually hurting us by 1 percentage point. So it was actually taking us down a notch, right? And so we looked at that and we said, okay, this is clearly a focus area. So this is an opportunity to use the data to then focus your efforts, right? Because you need to do more than one thing, but within that, how can you focus your efforts? So we started an initiative within our recruiting organization, which we call GTA, Global Talent Acquisition, to really double down and focus on presenting diverse slates. So what we call, there's also something called the Rooney Rule, which you may know if you're sports fans. What we call it is actually presenting 100% diverse slates of candidates. So that means at least one qualified female candidate should be in the interview stage. And so what we did with our GTA organization is we worked with them and worked with them to educate them and then have them work with their partners like agencies to say, look, we need to present at least one female candidate for all of our Director Plus roles. So globally, including technology, that is our goal, is 100% of them. So, we didn't set hiring targets per se, but we said, look, if we at least interview one woman, if you don't interview any women, it's pretty hard to hire them. But if you interview at least one woman, you have a shot at hiring them. And what we were noticing when we broke down our recruiting data was that, you may have a problem early on in your pipeline. You're not getting enough women even in the door, in which case resume redaction is a great kind of thing to look at. But if you are a company that, in general, once you get them into the pipeline, you tend to interview them and tend to invite them back and tend to make an offer, and they tend to accept at higher rates, then really you can focus earlier on in the pipeline. And so that was something that we chose to do. And I'm pleased to say that we just had our last Global Win Summit, and we presented the data on this initiative, and in 6 months' time, we completely changed that over so that hiring was no longer kind of a drag on our leadership population. It was starting to contribute again. So I just want to say that, well, I know that there's lots of reasons to be frustrated and angry, and I don't invalidate any of that. I will also offer up there's lots of reasons to be hopeful too. I mean, we were able to make this change, and it is a systemic effort. This is a multi-year systemic journey. You need lots of partners and lots of allies in the company, and we do need to recognize that there are different people that are in different stages of their change journey. So, one of the things that I do is I actually map that out internally to say, look, here are our leaders, and here are how I think they are on their change journey. And depending on where they are on their change journey, it makes sense to engage them in different ways. What I want to say about our technology organization specifically, so I mentioned our CEO is quite passionate about this. I will also say that we have CTOs that are terrific leaders on this, and in particular James Baresi, who is our CTO of PayPal. He's been a real leader in this area, and to the point someone else made earlier, he does happen to have, I think, 3 daughters. So he comes at it from that perspective, but I will say that he also recognizes this as a business issue for him, that he needs diverse talent and diverse perspectives in order to get to better ideas and more innovation in his team. And so he has taken a consistent, concerted effort. He knows that this is a multi-year journey for him. He knows that this is, he has pipeline issues in terms of, the supply of women as female technologists, but he also knows that there's an opportunity to potentially get more than his fair share of women. And so that is the approach that he's taken, that even though it seems daunting, he is committed to doing this over the long haul, and he's been a real leader in the company when it comes to this. He has the good fortune of partnering with some organizations like the Anita Borg Institute. Someone had mentioned Grace Hopper earlier. That's their annual conference, Women in Technology, and James has been really active in their Technical Executive Forum, which is basically a forum of CTO or CTO type leaders. And so we are in good shape there. So I as you can tell, I could talk about this forever. I will pass the baton to Shelley. Thank you.
In my world, and I think one of the things that I love the most is one of the expressions, if you can't see it, you can't be it, and how important being an inspirational leader is in our efforts today. And you talked, Michelle, about what you said was not sexy. I thought it was really sexy. And I think that these are really important topics to hit upon. And gender equality is not a female issue. It's an economic and a social issue. It is a people issue. Why is this a female challenge? Why do we have to be more bold to ask for the raise? And we were having this conversation just earlier when you asked the question, and I don't mean to pull you out of the crowd, but what you asked was a very important question. And I don't want women to have to be aggressive and bold to get ahead. I want you to be you to get ahead and to bring your femininity and who you are to the table. And we talk a lot about female leaders, and we mentioned collaboration as, in today's day and age for business, collaboration is one of the greatest assets for a business leader today. So what does that mean? Women, when we start in the workforce, we're 50-50. We start 50-50. It's not a problem. It's not like we're discriminated against. We start 50-50. As we rise the ranks, we gain more responsibility at work, And we also are gaining more responsibility at home or with our elderly parents. And women predominantly are still responsible for the family in general. So what does that mean? It's not a female issue, it's a caregiver issue. It becomes a caregiver issue. But guess what's fascinating about that? Caregivers have the following traits. They care, they're emotional, they're passionate, they're team builders, they're visionaries, they think about the big roadmap, right? And they raise their teams like their family. They are a we, they are not an I. They are a we, they're collaborators. The greatest strength of leaders today are those of caregivers. But what's happening? We're losing those caregivers to leadership roles because they drop out. When we get to that leadership role, one of three things happen. We either drop out completely because we can't do it all, and you know we women have to multitask on steroids, and this whole need of perfection becomes a big problem. By the way, perfection is boring. It does not exist. It is unattainable. Redefine it and create your own sense of what's better than perfect for you. But we drop out because we can't do it all. Or number two, we leave to start our own company, to create our own rules and be right, which is a great thing. Or we go into leadership roles, but we conform to the rules that never made sense to us as we were rising the ranks. So here's sexy for you. What Sarah Jessica Parker says, and I love her, she says, a woman that wants to be a man is a waste of a woman. Did you hear what I just said? I have been different my whole career. I am not known as a chief executive officer. I've been known as a chief troublemaker. And I'm a chief troublemaker because I've broken every rule that didn't make sense for me, even, by the way, when I had no permission. And I say that leadership is not about age. Leadership is not about number of years of experience. Leadership is about action. And when I did not have permission to break the rules, I did, but I didn't tell the institutional chiefs. I negotiated with my colleagues on how to have, and by the way, work-life balance, bad word. Work-life integration, work-life choice. You have one life with 4 dimensions. Work, family, community, and you. Don't forget about you. You are important too. And every single morning I wake up and I balance those 4 dimensions. Am I going to do a community thing today? No, so I have a little extra free time. Is my kid playing a soccer game today? Yes, I need to rebalance some of the other things. So work, life, family, all those things. You have one life with a lot of dimensions. Figure it out. So even when I was rising the ranks, I negotiated with my colleagues. And by the way, it doesn't have to be about family. A guy might want to go on a hot date. Knock yourself out. Why should you wait 6 weeks to go out on a date? You might have a dog at home that you want to care for. It doesn't matter what it is. We all have different priorities that don't just mean we want to sit at a desk 24/7, right? So I'd say to them, hey, and by the way, the more you teach and train your colleagues to be as good as you, if not better than you, the more opportunity you have to negotiate times and client, responsibilities. So I would say to my colleagues, hey, today at 4, I got to leave early to go to my kid's soccer game, but I'll cover you tomorrow so that you can go do whatever it is that you want to do. I don't care what it is. One is not more important than the next. Whatever's important to you is important to me, and let's call it a day and teach each other how to cross-pollinate. And you know what? I never got in trouble from the corporate men because I never told them. Like, who the hell cares? I got my work done. But why am I supposed to stay at work until midnight and keep my lights on to pretend that I'm a goody two-shoes doing all this work that I wasn't doing? I was doing shit and pushing the paperwork because I wanted to be recognized for working hard. It's not about working hard. Work smart. Fuck that. Work smart, I mean, seriously. And so today I'm going to talk about me, only because this is my journey, and I have been a woman in business for over 34 years. I was the only female CEO on the top 25 in market research my entire career. And Angelina recently said at the Kids' Choice Awards
She said, I've been different my whole life, and I have always apologized for that, or I felt uncomfortable for that. And she says, until one day I realized that being different is awesome. Being different is awesome. I bring something so unique to the world. Celebrate that. Don't apologize for it. Raise your hand and say, I'm different. I'm so proud of that. Bring it. Which brings me to diversity. Diversity is great for business. If we had all white men from the same neighborhood sitting at a board table, nothing would change. Why do you need the rest of the table? You've got that same opinion. Get rid of the other 20, because if they all think the same way you do, nothing will change. And by the way, the world is not changing. The world has changed. And social, digital media has created new ways for people to engage with one another. And guess what? Engagement is a girl's best friend. We know how to do this. This is an opportunity. So I don't want to talk about the challenges. We've been talking about this for years. I want to talk about what we're going to do. And my commitment when I became a leader was to lead with generosity. My commitment as a leader was not to conform to the rules, but to transform them as an institution. And why could I transform them? Because I was the boss. It's your responsibility when you become the boss to change the rules. The other thing that was important to me was I did not want to be a quota. I did not want to be hired because I was a woman. I wanted to be hired because I brought a unique skill set to the table. I talk all the time about the powers of diversity. I was just speaking recently at a big conference with Barry Salzberg from Deloitte, the CEO of Deloitte, who is retiring soon. But I was talking about bringing emotion to the boardroom. My greatest strength, and I have so many weaknesses, my greatest strength is my passion. My greatest strength is my emotion, and I will never apologize for it. So I wrote a speech called Bring Emotion to the Boardroom. I've sat in a board full of men my whole career, and I've been told there's no room for emotion in the boardroom. What? Emotion is people. It's caring. And when you care about people, they give you their best. And when you treat them like a family, the good, bad, and the ugly, they will do whatever it takes. They will stay forever, and they will never leave. When I left corporate America, I left because I was never right. I was never going to be right if I had a boss and a boss's boss and a boss's boss and a boss's boss and a boss's boss, and they were all men that were very linear and didn't see what you could do if you broke some rules and changed the game and had a little fun at the same time. So I left and broke the rules, and I started a company with one employee, me, and built it to 250, and actually sold it 5 years ago to the company that I left, that I had different opinions on. And so I'm sitting with Barry Salzberg in the back in the green room, and we were the keynotes, and he said to me, I love your topic, bring emotion to the boardroom. And he said, today is the first day that we actually hired a female CEO for the United States, for Deloitte US. And I said, well, Barry, did you hire her because you were filling a quota? Or did you hire her because you knew you needed to create a more collaborative, team-building environment and kind of make accounting sexy, where we can bring a whole different perspective? He said, yes. He says, but I want to tell you a story before you go on stage. He said, I had 3 out of 34 people on my board were women. He says, and those 3 women did not really express themselves. They sat quietly all the time. And he says, and then I decided, I need to rebalance this table. He said, so I got rid of 5 of the dudes, and I put 5 women on. Now I have 8 out of 34. He says, and you know what happened? The dynamics changed. He said the dynamics changed. Why? All of a sudden we went from financial linear planning and these very, kind of in-the-box conversations to having an animated dialogue. We had conversation. He says, and all of a sudden when I had 5 more women making it 8 instead of 3, the other 3 women became the vocal spokespeople. It gave them this comfort level. And in the past 2.5 years, yes, my claim to fame is I am the pioneer of online research. When you get those shitty long surveys on the internet, I created that a very long time ago. So I'm really sorry for that. But recently, my claim to fame is I've done exactly what we're talking about. I created a community of women at industry conferences, at CES for women in tech, at ANA for women in marketing, at 4As for women in advertising, agency business, ARF for women in research, Cannes Lions for women in media, Advertising Week for cross-pollination. And it happened by accident. I didn't mean to do it. It's called the Girls Lounge. I didn't mean to do it, but it happened when I went to CES 3 years ago, and I heard that there's so few women, less than 6% of women in technology. I'm not sure if that's accurate today. It might be less than 10% today, but it's still a very little number. And I didn't know anybody, and it was kind of intimidating, 16,000 people on this trade floor. So I called 4 girlfriends of mine that I knew were going, and I said to them, why don't we just hang out together? And if you know women, invite them. And so all of a sudden, I showed up 2 days later, and 50 women were in my room to have like a get-together. And by day 3, we had 150 women. And we walked the floor at CES as a girl posse. And we didn't feel like a minority. We felt like a majority. And it's empowering when you're with like-minded women that all share the same issues, and they're all corporate women, CTOs, CMOs, CIOs, CEOs, COOs. I got them all in this group. And it's cross-pollination, cross their corporations, from Kraft to Coke to Mars to IBM to eBay to agencies. They've become friends. And they are supporting and networking with one another. And it is the most incredible experience I've ever experienced in my life, because one of the panelists before talked about confidence. I say confidence is beautiful. It is not about outer confidence. It's about inner confidence. Whatever that takes to feel confident. But I'll tell you, the biggest confidence booster for me in the last 2 years has been my girlfriends in all these different companies that share a lot of the same stories, and we empower and energize and inspire each other to make a difference. So if we don't raise our hand and say, I'm going to do something, then it's not going to happen. And I know systemically it will take years, but there are steps that you can take as we move forward. Take them and find others that will go with you. And I know we have to wrap it up, so I will end there.
Thank you. So we have about 5 minutes for questions from the audience. If you guys want to line up here, we'll take a couple questions, depending how long they are. Thank you all.
Hi, my name is Kate. I'm here from Originate. Thank you all for your comments and your input. It's very valuable. I think we're all really learning a lot today and how to talk about this a little bit differently. Really quick, I wanted to give a quick shout out, because I've heard this come up a couple times on the panels already today, about the necessity of community and mentorship. And I just recently started using a platform called Glassbreakers. Has anybody heard of this? I love it so far. It puts you in touch with other women. It's powered through LinkedIn, so it will match you with women who have similar job descriptions or experiences you are, and then you can also list specific interests, and you can match with women that way and mentor with them through email. They may not be in the same town or whatnot, so I think this is a really great resource. My question for you is, another common thing, that has come up is the need for executive buy-in and commitment. What is your advice for companies where this conversation may be more of a bottom-up grassroots to get that?
I would say, so I think that's probably really common. I would say that find your ally. I think there's a lot you can do as a grassroots organization, and one of the things I didn't talk about was EWIT, or eBay Women in Technology, which actually kicked off before WIN got started by John. And so they are phenomenal. I mean, they have site leads in like 15 different locations throughout the world. They offer professional development. They run their own mentoring program. So I didn't even get into all of that. But I would say there's a lot you can do with that, but I would look for an ally at an executive level. It's really important to have a voice at the table where some of the decisions are getting made behind closed doors. It's really important in terms of funding. It's really important in terms of visibility, and so to make sure that your existence as a grassroots organization doesn't just isn't year to year. And actually, EWIT did that. For example, they went to the CTOs and said, look, we need a budget. This is what we'll do with it, but we need a budget before we had kind of formal process. And so they did precisely that. And so I don't know that they started out with their allies. I think actually they did. They found women who were in senior roles, worked with them, and then worked with them to influence the senior leaders, the CTOs. So it might be a multi-step process, but find your allies. It's really important. They are there.
Yeah, I think it's also showcasing that talent with what the talent is, not just I'm a woman, so pay attention. It's what do I bring to the table, as we said. So I've been doing video series on women in corporations so that it can be shared. One of the things that astounded me was how little visibility some of the women get that have done remarkable things. I mean, I don't even know if anyone knows Susan Kerr is actually the woman behind Apple. She created those friendly icons, changed the game. I mean, Steve Jobs is Steve Jobs. Let's not kid ourselves. But she was the one that made it friendly. We're moving from STEM to STEAM, adding arts to STEM, because technology is an enabler, but it has to be easy to use and have utility and friendly and all that. Women are bringing that to the table today. That whole friendly interface. Katherine Johnson, a woman that no one recognizes, was the woman that created for NASA that whole space projection to get men on the moon. And no one talks about this. So even within organizations, we need to give visibility to women in organizations with what they're doing and how they're bringing that added dimension and added value.
And I would just say, we've worked with, I'm with a boutique consulting firm, Exponential Talent. We've worked with several different kinds of companies in the tech space, and we're seeing real success with companies that come to this change momentum from different ways. And so there are companies where grassroots movements gather enough energy that the right people that are in power to also add the top down begin to take notice. I've seen where a leader of the sales organization had an aha moment, and he's driving it, and all of a sudden all his peers on the leadership team are saying, oh, how can I do that for mine? Although in my organization I have this different problem. And we've had the wonderful example of the CEO at eBay. So I think change can happen in lots of different ways, but it is about engaging everybody at the table in different functions, men and women, and at all levels of the organization.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies, for sharing your great insight with us. I love it, Shelley, what you said about, change now. And I'm Marina Lee, a founder of Women in Tech Network, and we are about change now. So we're creating 1 Million Movement, and we love your input and anybody else, and we're approaching it from top down. So we're starting to talk with a lot of SVP and C-level executives from studios as well as tech companies to various different industries, and we will be creating a Mentor Her app as well because we feel that it's such a need. So anybody who can assist us, we've been getting a lot of calls, a lot of appointments, so we welcome your help, we need your help. So let's change the ratio today, and we may take a few years, but let's move now.
By the way, I'm all in, and I will help you. I feel like this Shark Tank. I'll take it. I think start with not calling it change. I think change is a scary word, and it's evolution, and it's called reality. Like we need a new word for change. And when I started this girls' lounge, we had 4 women. We now have 3,500 in less than 2 years, because when there's a need, people jump in. And now men and women around the world know about the Girls Lounge, and we're actually working on a project with the White House with the VA, and I just want to talk about how change can happen when you just decide it's going to and you make it work. We're doing an assisted technology program for prosthetics for vets, and so I said I'd love to focus on female vets. I mean, do you know that prosthetics are not made for man or woman? They're just made basically for men. But a woman with a prosthetic can't put lipstick on. A woman with a prosthetic can't snap her bra. Talk about living confidently. You can't live confidently if you can't do basic functions and feel like a woman. So I got the White House and the VA to create a female challenge, which we've never done. First time ever. I just said, hey, how about? I suggested it. The answer was yes. If you don't ask, you'll never know. Go for it. Like, what the hell? Just go for it, right?
Absolutely.
So we're now going to have a female challenge, and I'm going to showcase female scientists and user designers and bring them to the table. And we're going to invite women in tech to create Girls Who Code and Made by Girls to create these challenges because they have a different a different view perspective for prosthetics. So it just starts by starting, but I think the word change is scary because it seems dramatic, black, white. Just start telling a new story and start a new conversation without apologies and without talking about the negatives, just start talking about the opportunities and the positives and reinforce them.
Completely agree. Right now, we are the biggest women in tech organization as far as events concerned because we said, you know what, we're going to do this. And every event that we've had, it's been wall to wall. So we've been welcoming a lot of men on our advisory board. Now we're 50-50 men. So we need everyone to be able to make this difference.
How great is that you're inviting the men to the table now? That's good.
Thank you.
Adjusted for my height here. A little bit nervous, sorry. My name's Ivan. I represent the CureCoin team, which is a global community of 170,000 individuals who participate in citizen science. And recently we looked at a survey from Stanford University and found that only about 2% of the participants in the research that we do with our PCs, our phones, our laptops are female. And so I just wanted to bring that up first, but that's not my question. Actually, my question is, with the drastic reduction in the manufacturing sector, starting back in the 1950s and just slowly degrading down into, the year 2015, do you see that drastic loss of the manufacturing sector has actually contributed to the lack of pathways for women to enter STEM fields outside of traditional academia? And that's my question. I just wanted to know your opinions on that.
It's an interesting question. I don't know that any of us up here are probably qualified to answer that. It sounds like a very economic question, like in terms of sectors.
You know, it came from Jane's, Jane talked about her opening up that breakout box for the phone system and having that eureka moment like, wow, this is, I could really do this. I could really sink my teeth into it. But, those eureka moments happen on the manufacturing floor too. And those opportunities have just totally been lost.
Well, I would say this. I don't know that women were particularly overrepresented in the manufacturing industry, and so the shift to a services economy probably in some ways opened up the opportunity. So I'm going to dabble in economics here. Opened up opportunities for women, but not necessarily high-skilled jobs. A lot of the services sector ranges across a lot of different socioeconomic classes. And so I think, what we see these days, if you look at labor participation, at least in the U.S., I can't speak for other countries, is that women, to Shelley's point earlier, are very much not only getting, 4-year degrees, but participating in the labor force, whether they're, single households, or single parents or married. So I don't know that the shift in in our economy has really hurt women in terms of STEM. I think it's much more unconscious bias in the images and the discussion that we've had around here that somewhere in the 70s, I think maybe 80s, we got this very male image associated with specifically with computer science. And I would say this, that it's interesting to start to look cross-culturally, that you look at countries like India and China where at least in the schooling and in early stage career, there are a lot more women that are in CS than in the US.
Yes.
And you start to ask questions around, are there cultural differences? And what I've heard from Shelley Carell at Stanford, she runs the Clayman Institute for Gender Research there, is that the little bit research that's been done about this is that in societies where there is a belief that particular skill is innate. So this notion of, I think Larry Summers got some pretty bad press around his assertion that science is, maybe men were just innately better at science than women. This was when he was still president of Harvard. Where in societies where that's the case, women do not do as well in STEM fields. In societies where the belief is it's a skill that you can acquire, go try it, give it a try, women tend to do better. And so I think in that notion, in China and in India, these skill sets are seen as something that you can acquire, whereas I think in the US and in some Western countries, the cultural belief is that they're somehow innate, that Mark Zuckerberg was just kind of born a genius, and Bill Gates is born a genius, and Steve Jobs is born a genius. So I think that hurts women, those kinds of cultural beliefs.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because going back to Folding at Home and the CureCoin team, we found that many of our participants actually probably, looking at the names, 50% are actually from the Eastern Bloc, or what used to be Eastern Europe, and the female participants, that is. So it's something that we're trying to change. But anyway, thank you for
I think it's interesting that you bring up manufacturing, though, because I think it has an impact on corporate America today, because that was like the Industrial Revolution. That is how a lot of the economies, the old companies started in the United States. And that culture still plays a role in a lot of the larger mega companies. And I think, if anything, it does a disservice, because now, there's a whole talk about the future of work and what that looks like and the new skills that are needed. And I think a lot of those old skills and the way we evaluate our employees and the way we hire still has some level of impact from those old ways, and now we're learning to look at it in a different way. And women have a lot of the skills, sometimes even are stronger in some of the skills that are required for the future of work.
Yeah. I think also Megan Smith is going to do wonders. She's the CTO of the United States of America, and I travel quite a bit with her, and she's trying to bring more visibility and attention to encouraging women that it's cool to be in science, technology, engineering, and math. And often, I talk to so many women in these fields, and they say, we go to school and we're not supposed to be good at math, and we're not supposed to be good in science, and they opt out, especially when they walk into a classroom full of men and they say, I'm the only girl in here, it's going to be uncomfortable. And it's that Barry Salzberg policy. If we could put more in, I went to Barnard, and I did not understand at that point so many years ago the value of being in an all-women's college where you're with women that it's so you feel comfortable. I mean, maybe that was too overboard, but where you feel comfortable. And the same thing when you go into these STEM programs for manufacturing or math or science or any of those things, and you're the only one there, you kind of feel like you're not supposed to be there, so you back out versus lean in and, say, encourage others to join you so that you feel more comfortable. And it's encouraging that comfort level so that we get more women raising their hand for those fields too.
Got to start early.
Thank you. All right, we have 1 minute before lunch, so I want to do rapid fire final thoughts. We have in this room different ages, genders, backgrounds, places in their careers, people who are interested in negotiating their first salary, and people who are CEOs of companies looking to sell. If you could give one sentence that everyone takes away, one sentence, hopefully we'll go through this in about a minute. What is that one sentence for each of you, for those of us in the room to take away at lunch? Starting with you. Or whoever has one first.
I think it's one of the hardest things to do, but we need to build awareness, educate people about unconscious biases, and figure out how to break them in our embedded processes.
Great.
I would say I talk about redefining leadership, and I define leadership as the expression of the highest version of yourself, such that you inspire others to be the best version of themselves. And so I'd say really take on being a leader at any level that you are inside of the organization. And it's very interesting, the attention, the energy, and the opportunities that will open up. And then, like someone asked the question earlier about what if you have no one at the senior level of leadership. It's possible when you're showing up powerfully to create an energy such that you begin to get the exposure that you need.
I think we do need to change the culture, and so to the comments about implicit bias, I think that's really important, that we all need to um, educate ourselves to see it, to recognize it, and then to block it. And it's not just the responsibility of those people in this room, it's the responsibility of everyone because we all have it. Women have unconscious bias against other women. People of color have unconscious bias against other, people of color. We all have it. It's all of our problem. We all need to solve it together.
I would say, don't just have a seat at the table, have a voice at the table, but know what your voice is. Understand your strength and bring your differences every day and celebrate them. And to wrap it up, leadership is not about age, it is about action.
Thank you. Thank you all.